The Trump administration is now escalating its fight against drug cartels. The Pentagon carried out yet another deadly strike on what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says was a boat carrying drugs off the coast of Venezuela without providing any evidence. Hegseth said the strike, which happened yesterday, killed 4 people. It is the 4th known U.S. attack against what the Trump administration says are narco-terrorists smuggling drugs. But the moves are also raising major red flags to some who say the Trump administration failed to provide any legal rationale for these strikes. Joining us now, former Army Captain Margaret Donovan. She is a former assistant U.S. attorney and Army lawyer who has deployed to Iraq and Syria. She is now in private practice and a visiting lecturer, at Yale Law School. No one better to talk to about the legality of this. Just give me a sense of how you read this from a legal vantage point. What authority does the president have to carry out strikes? But more importantly, when the administration is not providing any evidence, not briefing members of Congress, not seeking specific authorization, and using this kind of ambiguous term, narco-terrorists, to kind of sneak it into the broader war on terror, which has its own legal problems. What do you make of all of this?
Sure. I mean, I think the answer is actually quite simple. He has no domestic or international legal authority to conduct these strikes. And when you don't have domestic or international legal authority to conduct these types of strikes, what you are doing is murdering people. And that is a real problem. I think, to your point about labeling these individuals narco-terrorists, it seems like somebody is advising Hegseth or the president that if you call these groups domestic terrorist organizations, suddenly you're allowed to kill them wherever they are. That is not true. That is not an authority that you get when you designate somebody or a group of people as a terrorist organization. So what you're left with is just unauthorized killing, and that could leave people subject to criminal prosecution in the United States or a court-martial, depending on who is actually clearing these airstrikes.
Could you talk about that a bit, about the process? You were a JAG officer in Iraq and Syria. Can you talk about the process that goes into authorizing one of these strikes on an enemy combatant, which these are not defined as enemy combatants, they are narco-terrorists?
Yeah, of course.
Narco-traffickers, rather.
So first of all, before you even go on a combat deployment, you go through training, you learn the rules of engagement, you learn about something called a declared hostile force, right? So you have something or a group of people, an entity that is engaged in armed hostilities against the United States, and you learn about when and where and how you can engage that enemy. And so when you actually go into country and we're working in a strike cell, for example, I worked in one in Baghdad and I worked in one in Syria. You're in basically a centralized room where there are a lot of different people that are involved in a strike. You have somebody who's maybe clearing airspace. You have somebody who's giving you intelligence. You have somebody who's talking to either the unmanned aerial vehicle operators, the drone operators, or the aircraft. And then you have a lawyer and a strike authority, the person who's actually authorizing that strike, right? So there's a lot of analysis going into a strike before you actually execute. But the upshot of all of that is that you are there based on international authority or domestic authority to be engaged in hostilities in that country, right? That is your legal cover for conducting airstrikes. And you don't have that here, right? You have sort of this patchwork of what I think the administration thinks is legal authority, calling something a domestic terror organization, saying that somebody's a narco-terrorist, but that's not actually authority. And so that's the problem here. One, I think, significant tell here is that Maduro was indicted, right, under Trump 1. So the Trump administration has already said Title 18, the penal code, the federal criminal courts, that's the way we deal with drug trafficking, with narco-terrorism, right? And then you step back a little bit and think, all right, let's just pretend that the people on these boats were actually drug traffickers, right? Even in America, drug trafficking is not a capital offense. So how do we make that jump, that we could have a drug trafficker in America who isn't even subject to a capital offense, to whoever is on these boats? And that gets to the other point that you made, which is that we have no information, right? We have almost no transparency as to who these people were. I don't even think the administration has said what DTO they are affiliated with, right? We don't even have the name of the cartel.
Well, there are some concerning signals. The New York Times sent reporters there who spoke to one person who said that their husband, who's a fisherman, was actually on one of these boats.
I did not learn that, but that's exactly what I was afraid of, right? I mean, you're going to have families coming out of the woodwork and saying, my family member was on that boat. And so that is something that should be really concerning to people that are working in these strike cells. You do not have legal cover, and you have a really big problem if you you start realizing that there are families, there are other people associated with the victims of these strikes who are going to come out of the woodwork and who you better hope not seek legal action against people in America for this.